Ariel. Welcome to my tiny house by Nyth, where I live off-grid in the mountains of northern Wyoming. I'm going to show you around today. So as I walk around from my door here, I have these little flower boxes that kind of give me my skirting / let me plant flowers and herbs and stuff around the house, which is nice. I've got a propane line that comes into the house here. This is for my backup heater, and it runs underneath here to where I'll show you the propane tanks. I've got a vent for my direct vent propane heater, and that has to be kept cleared all winter. It is clear now, but in the winter that you have to keep that shoveled, otherwise you'll have fumes backing up in the house. I keep the entire perimeter of the house shoveled because I have things I need to get to and vents the entire way around the house that have to be accessed in the winter. Right now my snow pile is waist to shoulder high. Midwinter it was well over my head, level with the eaves in spots, so there was quite a bit of snow. But I did keep the entire perimeter of the house clear just so I could access and fill and vent everything. So as you come on around the corner here, I've got most of my propane tanks. I have 2 100-pounder tanks here. If you live somewhere cold, it's kind of important to have a bigger tank because when it gets well below zero, the very small tanks have a hard time vaporizing sufficiently for things to actually draw propane, even if they're not empty. So I do have 2 of these. Under this little cover, I've got 2 40-pound ones. They work fine, but when it gets really cold, they definitely will not use the full tank before it stops vaporizing, and I use the big ones. One of these is connected to the intake I just showed you over there. As you come around this side, I have the vent for my water heater. I've got a 10-gallon tanked propane water heater, so it does have to vent outside. That's another thing that has to be kept snow-free in the winter, and yes, the snow did get higher than that and had to be shoveled down so that can vent properly. Next door is the intake for my water. It does have a hookup. If I had a pressurized like garden hose, I could connect that, but I don't. And on the other side is just a little intake where I can fill it from a water jug, which is what I do. So those just close up to keep bugs and things out. This is where the power actually comes into the house. If you were parking this wherever randomly like an RV, this is the main power. Under the sink in here is kind of the breaker box for the house. This cord is actually coming from the other end of the house because this was set up to just run as an RV, and when I put in the batteries and all the solar related equipment, the only place that made sense to have them was the other end of the house. So the power is simply being piped from that end of the house into this end to go to everything else, which is not necessarily the way you would design it if you were planning ahead. As you can see from the moose scat very close to the house, only a few feet away, that I do get wildlife very close to my house here in the woods, even to the point of having startled a teenage moose that was laying down with his back resting up against the house this winter when I didn't realize he was here and he didn't know I was coming home. So the next thing I've got is I have a sink drain that comes out from under the house there. You can't see because of the remaining snowbank. It does drain directly onto the ground. This little wooden tunnel gives it room to continue to drain all winter without icing up with the snow that falls off the roof. But it does just drain down, pretty much vanishes right away into my very rocky soil that I have here at the top of this little hill. But that prevents it just from getting any possibility of getting plugged up with ice over the winter. So that's what that box is there for. It just moves out of the way in the summer so I don't have to trip over it. So right here you can see where my chimney comes out from my little wood stove. That's 3-inch pellet stove pipe actually. And it seems to work pretty well since I've got a very miniature wood stove. It would be better as far as airflow if it went straight through the roof, but the wood stove was a later addition for me and I didn't want to deal with cutting a hole in my roof. So it comes out through the wall and goes up and seems to vent pretty well. Here I've got another propane tank that goes to a separate heater, and it was just a little shorter to run the line for it by placing it here versus having it at the end of the house where all the other propane tanks are. This is my generator's own tiny house. It keeps it warm and dry. Not that a generator really has to be warm, but when I had it just under a tarp, I had to take the tarp off so it could vent while it was running, and then when it would snow while it was running and not tarped, ice would pile up on it and melt because it was warm and run down into little things that when it shut off would ice up and not want to ever start again. So the little box has resolved all that. It also lets me keep a little funnel in the side for filling it with oil or gasoline. Right here you can see where the power cord comes out of it and runs into the house. And I've got a handy little prop right here so that when it's running and it's warmer, that's why the flap is here, it can be raining or snowing and it can still circulate enough air that it doesn't overheat. There is a fully opened end on the, well, mostly open end on this side, which is where the exhaust is pointed, so that most of the noise and exhaust is directed down this hill and directly away from the house. So the box, in addition to protecting it, helps a lot with reducing any audible noise, especially from inside the house. It's a very quiet background noise when it's running. As you come on around here, I do have a little grill. It does not always reside right beside the house. In fact, in the summer, it's out by the fire pit where we do most of the grilling. But for accessibility in the winter, it is right here. I've got a oversized, very sturdy tarp just to protect it for the snow loads we get around here. But this is a great size for doing, you can grill meat for several people if you're doing, multiple different dinner items on the grill at once. It'd still feed 2 or 3. Last night we had elk steaks cooked on here. They were, that was from an elk that was harvested here on the property. This uses wood pellets. It's got a little pellet bin right here. So it's a little bit like a pellet stove. Just feeds that into there, and so it both is grilling and smoking meat at the same time, and just gives things a really nice flavor, doesn't dry anything out, and it keeps everything, all the juices sealed inside. Over here I've got a little, what looks like an outhouse, and it was once upon a time the outhouse for a logging camp that used to be here. I do not use it as an outhouse. For me, it is my little garden shed, which allows me to keep some things under a roof that I don't really want to have in the house. So let me show you that. Here I've got just a tarp door. There was originally a wood door on here, but long before I moved here it had fallen off and therefore rotted into the ground. So the tarp door works just fine. And inside I can keep things like gas cans, water bottles for filling my water tank, an extra propane bottle, shovels, rakes, gardening tools, all that kind of thing that you don't really want to have inside your house. So up the hill here you can see my solar panels. It would be a little handier to have them down here beside the house, but what I was finding is, especially in the winter, because I live on the north side of a hill, which is not ideal for off-grid life but is the available parking option for my house, they just did not get a lot of sunlight down here. So they are clear up the hill, and you can probably see the cable runs down through the trees and then into the back of the house where I had pointed that out. And that just lets them get a lot more sunlight, especially in the winter. As you come over this way, you can see I've got a large wood pile that is both for my wood stove inside and for my fire pit, which is still under snow at the moment, outside. So over here you can see the top of the frame for my swing set. I took the seat off for the winter just so the snow wouldn't tear it up. We've got a fire pit, if you can just use your imagination, a bunch of little seats and chairs and benches, and it's a pretty cool place to hang out in the winter. Just beyond that, kind of from the corner of the wood pile the whole way, underneath the dead tree that came down over the winter, and to the kind of back of the clearing is about 100-foot by 25-foot garden, which, as you can see, I can't plant quite yet because there's a lot of snow to melt first. Okay, so that's kind of everything around the outside of my house. Now I'm going to invite you guys inside and we can take a look at what's actually in my tiny house. Okay, so in my mudroom here, I've got a coat rack, as you can see, pretty well blanketed with coats, pants, scarves. I do live in a cold climate, clearly, and I have certainly not minimalized down to just one of those, so I have a full rack. Below here I've got shoe storage. You can see little hooks here that are great for hanging smaller pairs of footwear. And then I've got a mud tray just for boots and other muddy footwear that lets me set things in there so it can kind of drip dry before making a mess all over the house. So that keeps that footwear scene kind of contained to the mudroom corner, which is pretty nice. On this side I've got the living room, which also becomes a guest bed. The couch was built by a friend and I, and there is storage, I'll show you in a minute, under all of that. But the guest bed part, we've got two little screws that hold this in place, and this whole panel just rests right on the little lip built for it. These drop in and secure it. And then the back of the couch fits right there and makes a little lounge, guest bed, whatever you'd like to use that for if you want to expand that space. So that works pretty well for having friends over to sleep on. I've slept on it, or if, you know, just a person or two want to lay there and watch a movie together or have a little more space to relax. Underneath the couches, I've got two separate storage bins. These cushions just pick up, and there's a lid like this. This one has random things like my little carry-on luggage, extra towels and sheets, my tiny little vacuum, just a few of those random things I don't have to access real often, but they're kind of bulky, and it's just nice to have them out of the way in a place like that. Totally separate, the other part of the L here, there's actually a gap of about 6 inches in between these two bins, and this one, as you can see, has open slats versus closed, so it ventilates well, because this is my power box, and sometimes the equipment running in there does get not really hot but a little warm, so I want air to be able to circulate, and I don't want sheets and towels piled on top of battery cables, so those boxes are totally separate. This one you can see inside as well. Okay, so first over here is my battery bank. I've got 5 155 amp hour batteries. That's about 500 pounds of batteries. That's my storage for all my electricity, whether it comes from the generator or the sun. When it's coming from the generator, this is a charge controller that lets that power be safely stored in the batteries without overcharging or blowing them up. On this side, there is a charge controller that does the exact same thing for power coming from the solar panels. It again lets it safely feed into the battery bank and not overcharge. In between, I've got a little monitor right here that just lets me know what's going on with the batteries, how full they are, whether they're charging or emptying, all of that. And then as power leaves the batteries, it goes through this inverter, which turns it from DC power back into AC that can be used by any regular thing you would plug into an outlet in the house. So above my living room, I've got another little storage loft. This little cabinet in the middle is mostly used for food storage. I do have a garden when it's not winter, and I do can things, and you just have to have some room to put those things. So that's in there. People ask me how I get to this loft. I don't have a ladder for it. I'm just a little bit tall, and I have a couch. So this works just fine, and I can reach everything in the cupboard and close the doors in the right order. And then just other little, some files of paperwork, things that have to go somewhere and things like that. That's just kind of, again, not super frequently accessed storage, but I can get to it when I need to. As you come around this way, I have bookshelves and photograph bookshelves on the two sides here that I love to read. I get a lot of my books from the library or borrow from friends or things like that. But I did have some old books. I like antique books. I realized I could have a Kindle and it would take up a lot less space, but a Kindle doesn't have old binding glue and brittle paper, and I just like those things. So I kept some old books. Some of those are from my one grandfather who really loved to read that he passed on to me, and just some other ones that are either important to me or old or hard to access somewhere else, easy to borrow from. So that's why I kept some books as well. So here's my little tiny wood stove. You don't need a very big wood stove to heat a very small space. People ask me what square footage this would actually heat. I'm not sure, but it would for sure do more than my house. Because this makes it almost at times uncomfortably hot in here, which is easily remedied by opening a window. It does take very tiny wood. This old milk crate is my wood bin. This is about the average size of log that I burn in there, and that is probably smaller than most people's kindling. You can put 4 or 5 of those in the stove at a time. It radiates a lot of heat. There is tiles on the floor under the stove. I know they look like a wood grain, but that is actually tile, so any little coals or anything that get knocked out are not going to start a fire. I've got a little ash bucket right here that was a dog treat tin, I believe, at one point in its life. Lets me scoop ashes out. Again, it's metal, so if anything hot goes in there, it's not going to start a fire. The pot on top of the stove, I don't use a lot because I tend to create enough moisture in here by breathing and cooking and other things, but if it gets really bone dry and I need some humidity, I can just put some water in there and let it simmer. The chimney, again, goes through an elbow and goes out the side wall so that I didn't have to cut a hole in the roof. And the wood walls are protected by this shield that my local welding shop helped make for me. It's just 1/8" steel. It's on little feet, you can see at the bottom, that keep it up about that far off the ground so air can freely circulate the whole way behind it. This wood stove is smoking hot right now, and this shield is still quite warm to the touch, but I can touch it, and the wood behind it is genuinely cool. So that works really well to keep everything safe and fireproof right around the stove. It also does an excellent job of heating the house. Like I said, it's having the air circulate through a space this small just is not a problem. I don't seem to need a fan or anything to make that happen. And it's a super comfy, cozy, warm heat for a cold climate. Up above it here, I've got a little sign with my house name on it. People ask me how I got the name. I don't speak Welsh. I'm not Welsh as far as I know. I just have always thought it was a really pretty language. And Nyth is Welsh for my nest, which is the name I chose for my tiny house. So on this side, across from the wood stove, is my dining room. This little table, as you can see, spends most of its life folded up and compact and out of the way, which is very handy. When I need a tabletop or when I have a couple friends over for dinner, this little leg just folds out like that. This swings out, provides its support. And the other side does do the same thing. I'm not going to bother to flip the whole table around, but I would have to swing the table this way. And with both leaves folded out, I do have a really big work surface if I need that for something, which is handy, though the rest of the time it can be out of the way because it takes up most of the house. The other nice thing about this little table is that it has 6 drawers, 3 on each side, that just pull out like this, and I use them as places to keep, you know, tape and paper and staples and envelopes and all that kind of little thing up and down both sides there. So it really does provide a great deal of storage and workspace if you need, and stays out of the way. Also, my curtains here are blackout blinds. I made these myself from some larger, like full-length drapes when they were on sale. I just cut them up and re-sewed them to fit my windows. And they spend most of their time closed, so they're kind of wrinkled up. But they do a really good job of blocking light if I need them to, which is nice in the loft if I need to sleep in, or if I just want to sleep to a normal time and it's summer and it's daylight at 4, or if I want other people to not see through my windows, which isn't a big deal most of the time because there's nobody else around here in the woods. On this side, I've also got a little backup heater. On the tour outside, you can see the extra propane line that came into this. This was installed before I had a wood stove, so now I actually have 3 heat sources. But this is a catalytic propane heater, so it is not vented. It does create extra moisture and sometimes a slight odor inside, so I wouldn't use it for full-time heating, but it is absolutely great to have as a backup because it does not require any electricity or anything. It's a nice warm radiant heat. It can heat the whole house up pretty quick, and it's not a very expensive heater. So that is just kind of an emergency backup thing that is somewhat redundant since I also have the wood stove. But on really cold nights, because the wood stove's so small and it will burn out after 4 or 5 hours if I'm going to sleep all night or be gone at work all day. If it's -30 something outside, I will often just turn that on low as well so that I know the house will not be too cold while I'm gone and once the stove burns out. Over here we've got my little steep staircase up to my loft. There are drawers built into every step here. The very bottom one is actually a heat vent, but other than that, the whole way up, most of them are full. Each drawer gets progressively slightly narrower, but so the bottom ones are pretty big. I use them mostly for clothing storage, folded things, shirts, socks, that kind of thing. And there is no real rail, but I don't know how well the camera shows. This little handlebar here does work quite nicely to be a handrail as you climb the stairs because they are steep and it is a little bit more ladder-like. Over here I've got my TV screen. I'm not connected to any kind of TV service, but I have an Amazon Prime account, and every now and then when my wireless internet's working well enough, I do stream a movie. And laying down on the couch, this is a pretty great spot to have it, and it's out of the way. I also have a little curtain across the loft here. Most of it is walled off. This is a cabinet that opens on the other side in the loft bedroom. But with wood heat and how hot the house gets, and that I like the downstairs to be nice and cozy, and heat rises, but I don't like sleeping really hot. The wall and then the curtain that I added as a temporary measure does block a lot of the heat transfer. You can probably see there's open space above there, so some heat gets up there, but it keeps a lot of it downstairs, so when I want to go to bed, the loft's not like 4 million degrees. So that seems to be working pretty well. Then I'll show you what is actually behind the curtain. So here I've got my little extra storage cabinet. These doors swing out and the mattress is in the way, so you kind of have to do that. But they have random things like snowshoes and extra foam and some more backpacking gear, some things that are not in the van because they can't be frozen. But this is just a nice extra little bit of storage and gives me my privacy and heat blocking wall for my bedroom. So this is my little loft bed. It's hard to make a loft bed very tidily. You probably won't find any tiny house loft beds super neat and tidy. But this is a 4-inch thick, a very firm foam mattress from IKEA, which works really well for me. My back feels best when I sleep on firmer mattresses. Plus it's not very thick, so I get more headroom. As you can see, I can sit up the whole way in my loft. And that's pretty nice, though most of the time I spend laying down on the bed, even if I'm working up here during the day. I've got this little antique chest off on the side that keeps a few other odds and ends of things like some of my old journals, some sewing supplies, that kind of thing. And then I've just got room for a clock and box of tissues, and it's kind of like my little nightstand. And again, when I need to sleep and it's really bright outside because of snow or full moons or just the early sunrises we get in the summer here in the north, my little curtains do a pretty good job of blocking all of the sunlight. Over here you've got my kitchen, which is the biggest part of my house. I do cook a lot, and so when I was designing my tiny house from the start, that was the most important thing to me. I do have a good bit of counter space for a tiny house. I have a knife magnet up on the wall, which is nice because it keeps everything organized and out of the way. I have quite a few drawers and a lot of storage space here. Big cupboard that could probably be better organized for all kinds of containers and cookie sheets. I use 2 of these bigger drawers as kind of pantry drawers for some dry goods items, coconut, nuts, cornmeal, sugars, that kind of thing. I have a 20-inch stove. This stove does fit in a pretty compact area, but the oven has a good bit of space. I can put my giant roast pan with a 20+ pound turkey in there. You can fit a full-size cookie sheet in there, so if you do much cooking or baking, you don't have to get smaller than normal pans and all of that. Everything will fit. 4 burners. This is a propane stove. It does a great job of cooking. The only thing is, because of its size, you can't put 4 giant pots all in the same time. You would have to kind of stagger them. There is a hood vent with a light and a fan that you can hear kick on, so you can vent that as you're cooking. Above here I've got an open shelf with just all of my pots and pans and some mixing bowls. Here I've got more counter space. I've got my little fruit bucket that's running low. Even when it's snowy outside, I do some indoor gardening. I've got some sprouts starting here in the light from the window. Those trays all stack up so they can be out of the way. I have a double sink. This is also from IKEA and is absolutely perfect. I'm so glad that I took the space to put in 2 sinks because of the volume of cooking I do, and therefore the volume of dishes. It's just really, really nice. Again, I've got a off-grid system, so when you hear the water pump kick on like that, it's being powered by my battery bank at the other end of the house. This dead corner has the water tank in it that you could see me fill from the outside. So that's what's just taking up all the space under the drain board. It's a 35-gallon water tank, plus the water heater has 10 gallons. So that's about 45 gallons when everything is full. And again, the water heater is run off of propane as well to keep the water nice and hot. Then I have just shelving for dishes and bowls and plates. This little jug I just usually use for drinking water because I like room temperature drinking water. It also seems to work out really handy, coincidentally, that if I fill this and I fill the tank, about the time I tend to empty this one gets empty, which is kind of nice because there's no visible gauge on this, so I have a pretty good idea. And again, this wasn't planned, it just happens to be what I've observed as I use water, that I know that I'm going to need to fill this if this is just about empty. So that kind of works out well. And then I've got some more storage up here for things like oats and lentils and flour and salt. Here at the back end of the house, I've got my fridge and freezer. They're not very big, but there are separate compartments. That's my little freezer. That is the fridge. It's not stuffed clear full right now. It often is, but it's plenty of space even when you do a lot of cooking to pretty much get everything in there with no problem. I'm sure someone's going to ask why I don't keep food outside with my massive snowbanks, why I instead have a fridge that is electric and is my biggest power user for my battery bank. That would be because of the wildlife. I have got bears, wolves, coyotes, foxes, pine martens, ravens, and just about everything else you can think of that would like to eat food, so keeping it outside is not a very good idea. Up above here, I've got room for things like my big roast pan, recipe box, small alcohol storage, all that kind of thing is right there. As you come this way, this is the bathroom door. We'll go in there in just a minute. But I've got this little built-in shelf that lets me keep glasses and mugs and jars and all that kind of thing. If I take a step this way, I've got my big, deep pantry. You can see my spice collection on the door. I actually have overflowed and there's still some spices in the cupboard, so maybe I need to add another rack down on the lower part of the door. And then these shelves are pretty deep, which makes them kind of dark, but I can keep quite a bit of things in there, and that works pretty well because if you locked me in my tiny house, I could probably eat for several months before I started to have to go hungry. I might run out of variety, but I wouldn't starve. So here I've got a little vanity. There's a mirror, and behind that is a bunch of little shelves. The mirror swings out. That gives me space to just store all kinds of, bathroom products, which is handy. Got a little shelf below there, and then my Nature's Head composting toilet, along with my mini tiny house trash can, which is made out of a toilet paper holder, which gives me a cute little trash can with a lid. As you can see by looking inside it, this is not used as a shower normally. It works and everything is fully operational, but because I carry my water by hand, it takes up a lot of energy to fill that water, and a shower uses a lot of water. So I usually shower at the gym and do not use this, though there is no reason I couldn't if I wanted to. So instead, it's kind of my hanging clothes storage. I do use these higher hangers, which are kind of nice if you're anywhere with a small amount of space, because the way the hook is set down into the hanger, you get a few extra inches of actually hanging space on your clothing. And below that is just kind of my other odds and ends storage, a place to keep toilet paper, paper towels, extra boxes of tissues, folding chairs, so if I have some guests over I have that, clothes drying rack, etc. So that is what lives in my shower. So that's my tiny house. Again, this is Nyth, which means my nest, and this is my home off-grid in the mountains of northern Wyoming. If you want to find out more info about my house or what I do or daily life or things that work or things that don't, all of that, follow my blog at Nyth, that's FYNYTH.blogspot.com, or my YouTube channel, which is Nyth spelled the same way at YouTube.